Ahead and call this meeting of the Fergus Falls Port Authority to order. The agenda is as follows. Number 1, approval of the meeting minutes from August 16th, 2021, and then our special meeting on August 30th, 2021. Anyone have any questions, comments, concerns about the minutes? Claire has her hand up.
Not the minutes, sorry, but we do need to, I thought we should have on here that we need to approve our agenda, in which case I would like to say let's add a piece of business to the end of the agenda, if possible.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the last minutes first? So moved. Steve and Brent with second. Okay, thank you. All in favor of that signify by saying aye. Aye. And that carries. Next, Clara, would you like to add anything to the agenda?
Yes, thank you for asking. I would.
Feeling.
I would like to add a introductory discussion to a possible economic development opportunity.
Ooh, I like those. Okay. All right. So then, you want to do that at the end?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. Okay, then we are going to turn it over to none other than the man, the legend, Bill Sunmore. And he is going to tell us all about the awarding of the Port Authority Bonds Series 2021A for the Downtown Riverfront Project.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to call up, I'm going to sit here if that's all right.
I like
I'm going to call up Doug Green, our municipal advisor, as he can't be here in person. By the time the sale was all done today, he wouldn't have made it here in time, driving up from the Twin Cities. So I will call him up. We have a presentation on the screen. Jill, if you want to hit play from the beginning, so we'll have that ready.
Sounds European.
There you go.
Is he in Europe?
This is Doug.
Hi, Doug. It's Bill and the Fergus Falls Port Authority. So we have you on the conference call.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I hope it's raining storms down in the Twin Cities, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, we're getting just some rain today, so no storms. So.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Is the PowerPoint in front of the group?
It is. We're on the first slide that just, says City of Fergus Falls,
Okay.
Minnesota, and Port Authority General Obligation Bonds.
Okay. Well, on the second slide, and feel free to chime in here. We put this in just, I understand you all probably been talking about this project for years, and know that there's a lot of different funding sources that are going towards this project, some of which are still unknown. It's evolving month. And so down at the bottom, the funding sources in the box, you see that city funds, bonds, municipal state aid, the others, liquor store funds, and even potentially American Rescue Plan funds. So, some of those are to be determined, but this amount of 1.4 million is in that 3.4 million line item. So again, just the point is, because of the unknowns with this project, we don't know what those other funding sources are going to be. So we wanted to keep this bond issue as small as possible, with being able to, fund the construction project.
Doug, can I chime in there for just a sec?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the other intentions for that bottom line item of city funding is we're going to the legislature in 2022 to ask for another $1 million of state bonding dollars for phase 2. So that's also in that number. So if we are not successful, then we'll have to come back and bond again like we're doing right now. But that's why we're, like Doug said, keeping this bond issue as small as possible, because we originally asked for $1 million more than we received in state bonding for this first phase. So we're going through that process again next year. So that's why we're where we are today. So,
is that 1 million in the 1.7 up above?
The 1.7, that is that we have been approved for. That is what we're using in phase one. So that 1,750,000, that is what we were approved. We're asking for another $1 million on top of that. That would come out of that 3.4 million on the bottom.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, go ahead, Doug.
All right, so the next slide, we did take a competitive bid this morning at 10 a.m. and only received 2 bids, which is a little lower than normal, but it was not unexpected, just because it was a smaller par amount, a smaller offering of 1.4 million, and it went out 15-year repayment. I mean, if we had something like that at 10, 15, 20, $30 million over 5 to 10 years, you know, we would get up there in the 5 to 10 bidders. But nonetheless, we received 2 very good bids from local firms. Northland Securities was the low bid at 1.36, and then Robert W. Baird out of Milwaukee with a, you know, they both have a very big Midwest and really national presence to some degree. So we award off the true interest cost, which takes into account the coupons and yields and the fees that they pay themselves, called the underwriter's discount. And again, they're just 2 very good, aggressive bids that really reflect the market. So the board could be assured that these are fair market bids. So on the next slide, you may have noticed that we went out to bid for $1,465,000. And we don't know, we know we're likely going to get a premium, but with this small par amount, you know, not very big, and it was just smart. It was a very small premium that we got. What we do, so they pay a little bit more than 100% of what we're asking for. We take that additional amount and put it in the construction fund and reduce the amount that we need to borrow. Looking at the cost of issuance and the underwriter's discount, underwriter's fee, it came in very similar to what we expected. The interest rate was about 18 basis points. We were estimating about 1.58, came in at 1.36, and so that reduces the average annual debt service just a little bit to $108,000 per year. And then on the next slide, with each bond issuance, potential buyers do want an updated credit rating. Even if we had a credit rating 6 months ago, they would want an updated credit rating. The city's current credit rating is AA3, which you can see is considered very high credit, with a very high likelihood of getting repaid. So that obviously, you know, that along with the general obligation pledge of the city and of the port, you know, resulted in those low interest rates. And then on the final slide, just some very high level review of what the Moody's credit rating said. Very strong financial position, annual budget performance that really reflects the healthy fund balance, both in the general fund and the strong cash position in the enterprise fund, water, sewer, storm, and obviously the liquor store as well, which helps. Strong financial management, policies in place, good, excellent budget to actual results each year. It then gets into those things you don't have a lot of control over. In fact, it is a regional economic center and healthcare hub for the region. Certainly is the strength. And then the only thing that's preventing us from getting a higher credit rating is just relative lower income levels compared to higher rated cities. And of course, those higher rated cities primarily in larger metro areas. So some things are out of our control. But all in all, great results. We hit the market on a very good day to issue bonds, on a terrible day for all of our 401ks, but that's the way it works. And so Yeah, we would certainly recommend approval of and award the bids to Northland Securities.
Okay, and we have that resolution in your packet. You have the draft. Just a little bit before coming down to the meeting, I did receive updated resolutions, which we'll get to Jill, that has the numbers put in that Doug just went through. So that's, the resolution will ultimately, that you'll sign, will have all that filled in. You don't have that in your packet, you have the draft. So we're looking for that resolution, providing for the issuance and sale of $1,460,000 general obligation bond, Series 2021A, and pledging for the security thereof. Oops, rent payments, that is not the right word in there, I just saw. So she must have just, let me grab my packet. So Doug, we'll have to have Claudia do one.
Right.
That's a typo on her part, the rent payments, but it is providing for the issuance and sale of $1,460,000. So that is different from what's in your packet.
It is
And what would we,
1 million. Yes, that's correct.
460.
and that's the correction that needs to be made, is just the dollar amount?
Just the dollar amount.
Okay.
And this deal with rent payments, I can see that was from our previous Port Authority one that we did for Lakes Country Service Co-op. I bet she took and copied this, and that's from the law firm. So we'll have her correct that title as well.
And what should it say? Should it say rent payments or just cross that out?
Just cross out the rent payments. I mean, we're putting the full faith and credit of the city behind the bonds.
Yeah.
So I think if we pass the resolution providing for the issuance and the sale of that dollar amount, $1,460,000 GO bonds 2021A, it should be fine.
That's fine.
Yep. Because the pledges are all in the bond documents, so.
Okay. All right. So do we, anybody have any questions for Doug? Or Bill? Okay. So the resolution is a resolution providing for the issuance and sale of $1.46 million in general obligation bonds, Series 2021A, and pledging for the security thereof. Would someone like to offer that? So moved. Steve is offering. Do we have a second? From Bridget. All right. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, that carries.
And just as a side note, those of you city council members, you will hear some of this as a repeat when we get to the city council meeting, because you will also have a resolution tonight on city council.
Well, if there's one thing I can't get enough of, it's bonds. So
There you go.
I'm excited. All right.
I agree.
Great. All right. Thanks, Doug. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We'll call you back after 5:30, Doug.
Sounds good.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Good job, everybody.
Thank you.
Moving right along to the dairy property. Clara, would you like to give us an update?
Yeah. So we have a few things that we are going to talk about tonight. First thing, Karin, before we jump into the survey, which actually I'll pull it up in a second. I forgot to add this to the wording on the agenda, but one thing that we are going to need to do one more time is extend the purchase agreement between the city and the Port Authority while the DNR finishes their review of the appraisal. I had thought we would have enough time between when we got the appraisal back and the 1st of October. That is apparently not the case. So we need to extend it one more time, and I think we should be safe and extend it till January. Is that what we decided?
For sure the end of the year, I would say. Do we have till the end of the following year?
We did get an extension through the legislature for another full year to finish the project.
Certainly better be
but
done by the end of the year.
Brian reported this morning that everything was essentially off of the site. I thought it was supposed to be.
Will be.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
He had said it would be done at the beginning of September. I think there are still a few things remaining. So that's moving along, but yes, that is one thing that we need to do is extend that purchase agreement one more time.
Okay. And do we do that by resolution? Okay. So would someone like to offer a resolution to extend the purchase agreement? And what was the date we're gonna go with?
End of the year.
I think should we go to the end of this year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because if the DNR holds us up yet again, it's okay for us to come back and review it again anyway.
Okay.
To keep everyone on the same page. So the end of the year is good.
Okay, all right. Okay, so Brent is offering the resolution to extend until December 31st of this year. Caroline seconding, thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That carries, thank you.
Thanks, you guys. And then at the end of our special session that we had last month, Karin helped put together a survey for you guys to do that will help get us thinking about the RFP process for the dairy site. I think everybody except Rebecca has had a chance to fill it out, and Karin was helpful and synthesize all the results. And I'm gonna have Karin come up and just talk about what she's thinking for next steps for us, and then we can make a discussion about where we want to go with this. Karin, I have your memo up, so I'll pull it up for you.
I think Jill grabbed it, actually. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. So I think just to hit the highlights with the survey, some of the takeaways that we had. Yep, just one more up there. Perfect, yep. There seemed to be kind of an equal concern with members about both the uses of the site and what an eventual building or buildings on the site could look like. So I think that was one takeaway. The second takeaway is I know that we had a little bit of back and forth at a few meetings about the connection to the downtown and riverfront master plan, as well as a potential housing study, which is sort of in progress now. And the Port Authority results really reflected that public input to the downtown and riverfront master plan, in that it called for uses such as housing, a public green space, and public riverfront access with amenities. So I think that was something that was reflecting kind of the longer term thinking about that site. There was a little bit of a slight preference for a mixed use site, so whether that was mixed uses within the same building or just within the site as a whole. However, you might recall that there was one particular question that was just about commercial uses, and respondents to the commercial uses, were a little bit more lukewarm, or just wanting to, excuse me, to move intentionally about those commercial uses. So that might be something to leave up to the developer about whether or not to include commercial uses in the site. With the housing specific questions, there was a little bit more of a variety in the responses. There was a little bit of a slight preference for multiple family housing types, so apartments or condos. And there was a slight preference for housing that was different tenures, so some people would own their residence and some people would rent. And most responses were neutral about whether or not there should be needs-specific housing, so things like affordable or senior. And then overall, there was definitely a slight preference for an RFP that's a little bit more open for developers to respond to the needs of the community, as opposed to being overly prescriptive, like saying how many units should be provided or what types of units those should be. So overall, for sort of crafting the RFP, some suggestions for consideration would be that the RFP could state that the design is an important component of evaluating the proposal. Additional public space in addition to the LC-CMR parcel is of interest. And that the Port Authority doesn't seem opposed to mixed use and incorporating commercial space, but it would be up to the developer to decide whether or not that's something that's feasible. Along the same lines, the RFP could indicate that the proposals with that mixture of rental and home ownership is maybe a little bit of an interest, if the Port Authority maybe has a little bit more consensus about that. And I know that some people mentioned the housing study that's going on, and we would also recommend, that was a big component of contributing to that housing study, and doing a little bit of a dive into the dairy site, that maybe instead of saying, meeting one specific need, that the developer should just specifically address, like what in the housing study their project is responding to. For next steps, there was also on the second page here, Jill, if you've got a second to scroll down. Oops, third page, sorry. One more, my bad. This was just a draft timeline that is definitely a work in progress, but at least for the next couple of steps would be staff bringing just an RFP outline based on today's discussion and any additional information and feedback that we receive, and bringing an outline for discussion at the October meeting. And bringing a draft for discussion to the November meeting, and working to sort of finalize that language, before the holidays at the end of the year, and issuing that RFP basically in January. Thinking that there might be more responses if we wait until after the holidays, just with people being in and out of the office, but certainly open to any ideas or suggestions. With the goal of hopefully awarding an RFP sometime around mid-April, and then, allowing a developer to begin construction fall of 2022, if all goes well. So those are the summaries and takeaway and points for discussion based off of our survey. And we're also going to, excuse my frog in my throat today, distribute the survey to the Planning Commission next week. They meet on September 27th, and we'll also, I think we're looking to get some of the council members who are not on the Port Authority as well. So still a little bit tentative, but this was sort of the initial response that we had.
All right. Thank you, Karen. Does anyone have any questions on the survey results or the timeline?
Would it be possible to get a copy of it? Because it's tough to read from here for old people.
Oh, yes.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, yeah,
I can send you a copy.
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, yep, that would be great. Okay, well,
Quick question.
yeah.
Can you remind me when that housing study is supposed to be done, or is it?
Good question.
That is a good question. It's going right now. I don't know what their end date is, but
Okay.
I think they're only a few months out.
So it's gonna potentially line up almost perfectly.
I would hope that it would line up. They're doing the dairy site concurrently, but sort of on its own. So I think they'll be doing it at the exact same time as everything else, but I'll double check on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions on that? Okay. All right, thank you, Karen and Clara, for that. And Port Authority leased land discussion. Clara, would you like to bring us up to speed and facilitate that?
Sure. So we started this discussion at our last meeting as well, when we were talking about land uses for the Port Authority owned land that still remains owned by the Port Authority. So the Norgren property, the stuff by the racetrack. And we need to just continue that conversation, because we're gonna need to decide if we're going out for bids again to rent those parcels out. Fall is the time that we would probably need to be doing that, so that we can start signing leases for in December, January-ish. Or if we are going to be holding back on some of the land and performing infrastructure work, which is a conversation that we were having last time with the discussion of the extension of International Drive. So I don't have any further numbers on International Drive yet. They are still doing the soil borings and wetland delineation, so that's really gonna give us a lot of direction, I think, those answers that are gonna come from that geographical study, because then we can start talking more specifically about where a road could be and really finalizing those costs. But we do need to decide if we're going to go out for bids for renting the properties out. So what are our thoughts? How do we want to proceed?
You mentioned the soil borings. Where are we at on those? Have they given us a date when they're going to be done?
If they've given a date, they've given it to the engineering department, and they have not sent that date to me.
Okay. Can you find out and let them know we'd like to get that going sooner rather than later? Because I think that information will be really helpful for whatever we decide to do. Well, at some point I had asked Natalia to give us her thoughts from Greater Fergus Falls on what would be a good, just some ideas or some options. Natalia, did you want to just say a couple things about the properties and let us know if you have any ideas on them?
Sure, I think I sent you the local is it the local manufacturing impacts, maybe, just to put up. So, hello, thank you. I was asked at the last Port Authority meeting to put together an economic impact analysis on the differences between manufacturing and like what the Speedway is currently bringing in terms of job creation, tax generation, those kinds of things. I did not get the required data to put together a cohesive plan, so I, rather than sampled some of the job creation numbers and tax generation to put that top chart together. So, just generally speaking, manufacturing obviously has much higher impact. In terms of job creation, from a sample of 4 manufacturers located in the industrial park currently, they're looking at about 400 jobs versus 5 that are projected from the Speedway currently. And then in terms of tax generation, those 4 manufacturers pay about $252,000 in property taxes versus $11,000 from the Speedway currently. That's not to say that the Speedway does not have value. They bring in a lot of tourism dollars, of course. So I would just, ask you to consider what the highest and best use of that particular land is. Over the last month, we have received at least 5 inquiries from manufacturers from across the state that are looking to either expand or relocate, really interested in Fergus Falls. But the issue, it always comes back to us not having turnkey property or shovel-ready sites. So I think that in this period of growth that we're experiencing right now, it would be in our best interest just to consider investing in that industrial land. I do think it's possible. If you look at on the bottom too, that's just a chart that shows the growth over the last 10-year data set that we have available of the manufacturing output statewide. So you can see that growth is pretty significant. So I think that it is smart of us to invest in order to attract some of those new industries here. I do think that it's a feasible option to offer, a portion of that land. It's over 80 acres over there combined with those 2 parcels up there. I think it's well within reason that we could, work out a deal so that the Speedway can have land for their expansion, but then also offer that land with that extension of international drive to accommodate 1, potentially 2 really interested manufacturers. That would create several jobs and potentially retain nearly 200, depending on who that local employer would be that would locate there. So I think just in general terms, we could look at both options, but I just don't think it's highest and best use for the Speedway to purchase the entire 60-acre parcel.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. Anybody have any questions for Natalia or Clara? Any ideas on the matter?
So I think we talked about this maybe a couple of meetings ago when I asked Bill about the ARPA money and infrastructure improvements. Is that something that could happen to make a site shovel-ready? Plumbing and,
It would assist. That's one of the things we've looked at with our ARPA funds is using a portion of it for the International Drive area. I think, was it 4 or 450 I put on that list, I think? 450, which now with even more recent updates, it's maybe half of what we would need for water and sewer. So we'd still have to infuse more from water and sewer. And then, of course, then we have to look at the street infrastructure too. You know, the city typically has put in streets with where we bond for it because we have to physically pay the contractor to put them in. And then we have assessed a portion of that to benefiting lots. That's what we saw like on the Progress Drive lots which granted, we talked about those and how it was very high price tags on those because there was a lot of earth moving, but I struggle a bit because nowadays, you know, nobody likes assessments, everyone wants all the infrastructure in, so it's ready for them at no cost to them. Well, when it's at no cost to them, then it is all cost to the taxpayer. So, and I'm your stingy finance director, you know, so
that's good.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
yeah, but I also know the value of getting business here. We got to be smart that way. So it's finding that balance and what assessments will these developers stomach and legitimately so. They should put something in. I mean, nothing should be completely free all the time, but
I would imagine that there are probably other communities that would offer incentives to those types of manufacturers, you know. So if we don't go out and get them, then the opportunity may not be there anymore. So, yeah. So it seems like we need to. I mean, we need to figure out what it would cost, and then you know, and then look at all of our various funding sources. But you know, it's a long-term investment in the future of the city and in our workforce. So, does anybody else have any thoughts?
I think it's how competitive do we have to be, like you
Right.
said,
Mm-hmm.
so we're not overly, you know, aggressive. And then what kind of value do they bring, more specifically? So, you know, hundreds of jobs is really tough, but like 25 jobs, what does that mean? That's a realistic number that we could probably attract, and economically that would, I'm sure, pay for itself rather quickly. So initially we fund it, but eventually, I mean, that pays for itself. But just more objective information on that would really help, I think, us to be able to make a decision without thinking we're overdoing it or being too aggressive or whatever. From my perspective.
You know, and when it comes to you know, to quote unquote selling it to the public, it would be nice if we had like a case study of an example where we've done this in the past in town. If we've done something like this in the past, then what did we get for a return on it? I mean, like how many jobs were created? You know, I mean, just to give us some, you know, some reference, if that's a possibility. But yeah, I think that's good points, Steve. You know, and nothing at all against, you know, I-94 Speedway or anything that they do, but I mean, I think when we're looking at the future of development in Fergus Falls, I mean, we've got this piece of land that's ideally suited for this type of use. I think we need to look at that first and then find a way to work with the Speedway for whatever their needs might be. So.
And I just remind you also with the Bdpi grant that we've talked about here before, they would cover up to 50% of those infrastructure costs as well. That is a rolling deadline, and we do have a resolution to support an application for that at this time. We just don't have the data or the numbers yet in place. But there is about $3 million available currently for Greater Minnesota to apply for, but as soon as it's gone, it's gone. So if we do want to pursue this, it's something that we should probably apply for by the end of the year. So,
Your Honor, I think obviously coming back to the original question, which was do we or do we not lease the land? I think, you know, ultimately it's designated industrial, And I think if we, by that alone, it's not activity or recreational, which I would put in the bucket of the Speedway. And I think we should pursue basically more of the job creation that has a sustaining long-term effect rather than a seasonal one. Yeah, it's nice, but I also received a lot of complaints about noise from the Speedway. I think the atmospherics were not particularly good. So, yeah, and nobody really said that they saw a lot of the people in the restaurants. So, it might be an economic boost for certain segments, but not necessarily for the whole town. So, where if somebody creates, as Steve said, whether it's 25 jobs, whether it's 50 jobs, that's 52 weeks of the year, and 10 or 20 years of plus. And that's what we're trying to do, is get sustainability, not just, warm fuzzies for a year.
Yep. I think that's very valid.
And I would say for the ag land that we're currently renting, I think that's kind of, we stick to doing that unless there's an opportunity comes up, because we can always get out of that if there was a real kind of like need for some of that. I mean, when we just have to buy the crop. So.
Yeah, correct. I agree.
Yeah, and in terms of the jobs, I gave that range, Steve, just simply because those are the numbers that were provided to us based on the interested parties. Retaining jobs could be close to that 200 number, but yes, in terms of real or new job creation, probably 2550. But again, that's going to depend on how you determine to break up that land. Are you going to break it into 2 or 3 parcels for different manufacturers, or are we just looking at one? So, all things to be discussed.
So the BDPI grant, if we want to pursue that, what does that process look like? And is that something that we could start working on? Because it seems like if we want to go forward with the project, we would definitely want that grant. What's a realistic timetable, and what do we need to get that done? Bill?
Can I speak?
Please.
So I think for sure we need numbers on what would the project be, so that we can figure out how much of the grant could we apply for. And then I know with that grant, and Natalia, correct me if I'm wrong, but they want to know how are we going to match it, that we actually commit to matching it. Because it's one thing to say we'll match it if we get it, but I think we better know going in that we say, yes, we will do this, because if we get a grant from them and if we decide later, no, just kidding, what's the chance of us getting another one? So we better know going in that, yes, we are committed and we will fund this, we will levy the appropriate dollars to, because I would see you have X project, part BDPI, part water, sewer, stormwater funds potentially, and then there's always that bonding levy portion as well. So those I think would be the legs of it. Certainly, no one can argue that getting a 50% grant, I mean, that's great. We just have to commit to the whole thing then if we do that. So I think first one is getting the numbers, so we even know what ballpark we're talking in.
It's all for infrastructure, correct? Yeah, nothing else? Okay, and when would we have to have the money expended? Did they say that?
You have about 18 months from award.
Expended within 18 months?
Yep. But with, the ARPA funds where you can actually use some of that for the city sewer and water, you can count that as in kind also. You can do that with all of your engineering costs, all of that. So the city has that going for them too. But yes, obviously the funding mechanism is the big piece that we need to figure out.
I think the other part is just getting comfortable with the probability of putting somebody in there. And it's probably not going to be guaranteed, and that's just part of development. Unless you can find someone to guarantee it for.
Well,
you have a window of
yeah,
opportunity to do that now.
and we have talked about that, and there is one manufacturer that we could get a commitment from if that's what you would require to proceed. One for sure.
Well, I mean, I think we would definitely look at that, right? Talking I mean, normal city development, you don't have that. You still have to have a vision and realistically build out your infrastructure. So, I mean, even without it, I think we need to look at this. detail on. That's what we need to do to
Yeah.
grow.
Yeah, and in terms of that grant too, you score higher if you do have interest or like identified businesses already in place. But if, with that large piece of land, we would still score fairly high if we had at least one identified party with the option to, attract new industries because that infrastructure is already in place, so.
So, would it be by our next meeting, do you think that city staff and Greater Fergus Falls could work together to have some of those numbers, some rough numbers drawn up? Is that a possibility?
So that's an engineering question. Brian would have
I would
to
hope we would be able to.
be able,
within a month.
yeah.
You're definitely right, it's an engineering.
We've got Andrew's.
Let me speak to that real quick. I just talked to Brian about this last week, and this is an email he sent to me on Wednesday. He said, I had MEI take the project out of warp speed in consideration of the revised schedule to bid in early spring. And what that means is this manufacturer that Natalia just referenced that could commit, their original desire was to have a road built out yet this fall. So we were like, push the gas, let's get this thing laid out. And almost so fast you start doing sloppy work. So Brian said he's going to request a preliminary cost now that more detailed design has occurred because we were on that warp speed, but now that we can hit the brake a little bit.
Okay.
The last conversation that we had with this manufacturer that Natalia's referencing was they would look to, or they're comfortable with the timeline of starting infrastructure in spring, but bought us a little bit more time. So what we envision the next steps would be is we get those better numbers, which I think will serve us well in the long run. And then we're going to meet with the mayor and Natalia, some of the folks who have been working on this particular project, and start laying out what the BDPI commitments might look like, because we have no idea what the half commitment will be of the city until we know what those numbers are. So, if it's fine with the Port Authority and we're already on that road, I'd like to continue on that road. And then when we have that with Bill and Natalia and the mayor and Claire and I have comfort level with what those numbers look like and where the potential funding sources might be, that's probably a good time to report back to the group. If you guys want to be more hands-on than that, that's totally up to you. But I think we're kind of on a good direction with this particular project that I don't know if we need to complicate that, if that's okay with all of you folks.
No, it's if you, I think if you feel that the work is being done and we're moving towards the result we want, then I'm comfortable with letting staff in Greater Fergus Falls work it out and then let us know what you need and what.
I think each month we just get more and more clarity, and that'd be fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah, we don't have any good information because we have no idea. Like Bill said, we put $450,000 down because that was like the first shot at this, and now we're thinking just the water and sewer portion might exceed $1 million. So it's an expensive project, but it's an important one. So we just need to be mindful of how we're going to splice that out. And, take advantage of those ARPA funds where they're eligible, and then have Bill get creative to find the rest.
And then I think too, in the process of doing research, keep an eye on bolstering our case, so that we can say, we're making this large investment, but this is what we're projecting that we're going to get out of it. Get some solid numbers there to make it a little more palatable. So, anyone else? Bridget?
I just have a question about the Speedway. Are they actively pursuing additional land to lease? And so
Yes.
what is their expectation of us to communicate with them about a plan or
So-
what we're deciding?
Last year, so they have their lease is up in, I think, December. So we need to come back to them and say, and they have an offer out, so they, standing since they've had this lease in place, they also are willing to purchase the entire parcel. So,
The entire 80?
yes, they
Additional
would
80.
take the whole thing, or they have also expressed that they would be interested in talking about splitting and just buying an upper portion, leaving a bottom portion for manufacturing. So we have to come back to them and say, this is the direction that we're headed, and we're either going to entertain an offer from you on this upper portion, or we're not.
When are they expecting that?
Probably pretty soon. Their lease is up at the end of December.
Sure.
So that's why we're talking about some of this stuff here is we have active leases out on multiple properties, and we need to get down to, do we ask for those leases again? Like with the Norgren property, do we just continue to farm those? What I'm hearing is probably yes, because right now we're gonna focus on the International Drive expansion. So then, do we continue to lease the upper portion to the racetrack as we are doing now, and leave the bottom part so that we can pursue some of this activity come spring? Or do we entertain a request from them to purchase the entire parcel?
Is there any appetite for that?
I just have a clarity question, I'm sorry. So, they have their current space and they are leasing the upper portion, but want to buy the upper portion?
So
No.
they're currently leasing the entire portion, and what they did earlier was that they were subleasing the bottom part of it for farming, and then the farmer was out in time for the Wazota race. So their
I see.
request all along has been to purchase the entire parcel, but based on discussions that we had with them last year around the same time when we were thinking that there was another business that was potentially interested, they were open to the idea of the split, and they're
Sure.
still open to that.
So the port needs to decide whether we are in agreement with the split. Does the split accommodate the potential manufacturer?
Well, yeah, we could set a split to accommodate that.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
I think, if I recall the plan, obviously, that there was there's a piece by the rail tracks, and then the road was going to go kind of north of that, and then there was kind of like theoretically potentially 2 lots above that, and then kind of the quote campground. Is that what we're still envisaging, or are we envisaging something different than that? Because I wouldn't be supportive of, like, what's north of the road has to be industrial, because it won't pay for the road. I mean, either side of the road has to be industrial. We can't have one side of it being a campground, because we won't see the benefit of property taxes. So, I mean, I think if it was kind of that sort of split, then I'd be quite happy to see it split. But if they're expecting to come down to where that road is, then that's a lot of good land to give away.
Okay.
Is there anyone who feels that we should prioritize the desires of the Speedway over the development of manufacturing properties or industrial properties?
Well, I agree with Anthony. I mean, we want to favor manufacturing, but not to the point of losing it. That's where I differ a little bit. And, if we could move Speedway but keep it in Fergus Falls, I understand the noise is a whole different issue, but that would be the way to do it, is make the manufacturing as best that you can, move and keep the Speedway. I just think it'd get tough to keep it when you move it, because once they look at moving, they'll look all over. And so potential to lose it. So I would say do as much manufacturing as possible, but don't lose the Speedway. And so if we can go around it and be happy about it, doesn't take care of the noise issue, but at least we keep them both, and then look for other properties to
And it's
grow
only
manufacturing.
once a year or whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
Don't
if
forget about it until next Speedway.
yeah, I would say that if there's a way to do both,
Yeah.
we do both.
We want our cake
You want
and
to
eat it.
support your current businesses.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a good point of clarification that I mean, we do want to do both, but I think what I'm hearing is that if the opportunity to facilitate a industrial tenant comes, then that's what we want to.
That's fine.
Brent, you had something?
Now, if they're willing to just take the upper portion, I mean, right now they're leasing the whole thing. I mean, just for this next year, can we just lease them the upper portion instead of just leasing the whole thing? And then this way here, I mean, like I said, we don't want to alienate them. I mean, we don't want them going anywhere, but then again, they're willing to compromise, so we have the lower part for industrial use. I mean, worst case scenario, if it came down to the point where they needed a little extra space during, the WISSOTA or whatever they're going to do, and we don't have anything going on with that, we could possibly, for a short term, lease them that lower portion just for whatever event they're doing. But this way here, they're getting a portion that may be all they get in the future. And then this way here, we compromise and we can do both things at the same time.
I guess if they're looking at the camping, it'd be nice to have more specificity on it, if there's some way for the next month, to make these decisions, like what's our plan, here's what it looks like on the map. And so, because I agree, talking about things that facilitate a better experience out at Speedway aren't gonna probably match industrial side. So, if we can somehow put it on one side or the other to shield it from the rest of manufacturing, that's way different of a decision than if we can't. So, just the view of a map and what these options are would really help.
Yeah.
So I will reach back out to the racetrack owner and just see if he can provide a little bit more insight into what they are actually looking at, like what they'd want to be doing. Because I've heard different things, that it would just be for camping, or that maybe there would be a smaller track built. So maybe if we can get some more clarity on what that could actually look like, we can start to envision how we could actually use the site.
Yeah, that's a good point. Find out what they want to do with it, what their needs are, and then see how that fits into our plan. Bill?
We'd still want to lease whatever land we own for farming in the interim, right? Because
Yeah.
in the current job market, where even manufacturers, yes, we want others to come in, but we have no employees. Nobody's working anywhere, it seems. Everywhere you go, it's just, there's nobody working, and
Yep.
except us all here.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I don't think we want to, shut down the lease or operations
Okay.
until we had a sure thing in hand.
because otherwise, we'd have to maintain the weeds and whatnot, so at least by leasing it out, and
Yep.
we're getting money for that rent, and we're not having to be a port authority that has to take care of the land on top of that.
Totally agree. The job question, what you're getting at, is circular and there's not an answer.
Right.
The way to fix it is get the job, and then the rest will fall into place. If you build all around it, you may or may not ever have a job. But I think if you get the manufacturers, the jobs are there, there'll be a kind of a movement, but, it'll take care of it, I think.
But what about the housing? We can't forget about the northern property.
Housing, daycare, everything, but to me, without the job,
Yeah.
right, so.
Well, and along the same line, you mentioned housing. It would be good to see a projection of what that project would cost, and look at the returns on property tax, and because we do need housing, and that's another big rock to crack, as Kent would say. That and that kind of leads a little bit into the discussion of we've talked about it in the past of us as a port coming up with standards and practices that would be kind of a diagram of how do we proceed when manufacturer A wants to come to Fergus Falls or wants to expand. Do we pay for their infrastructure, because we should keep it fair, and consistent. And then we also have to look at the manufacturers that are already here, or whatever tenant, the local businesses say, well, I would like improvements to my road, or I'd like you to build me a road too. So I think what we need to do as a port is come up with kind of a process, and then that way we can use that same process with whoever may come along. Granted, we might tweak it a little bit here and there, but I think that would save everybody a lot of effort, not having to reinvent the wheel every time we've had this discussion before. We just need to get going on it. So
I think I'm hearing economic development policy.
yeah, we need one of those.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's citywide, not just the Port Authority,
Yeah.
because we get tax increment, tax abatement requests. Claire and I were just talking last week. we need a good economic development policy to see where does the city want to go? It's not about where staff is going, but what are the goals and objectives of the city, and as far as how much do we subsidize? What are those appropriate levels? So,
Yeah. And then as a manufacturer, even though I'm literally out of town, you go to, there's a lot of manufacturers in town, and you've got to be cognizant of, if you help somebody move to town to create 25 jobs when they've got vacancies for 12 jobs already,
Yep.
then be careful you don't kind of cheese the people that are actually here and paying.
Yep.
Because
I agree, and I think that those are big numbers for communities
Yeah.
to think about when, it's jarring when you hear $1 million for city, for water, and sewer. So I think it's good if we had a way to explain how those decisions are made and what those long-term benefits are going to be.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a great directive.
Yeah, that's a good point, Anthony, about making sure that the manufacturers and businesses that we already have know that we care about the health of their business too. All right. So if in the next meeting, if you want to update us on those items. So it sounds like we'll keep things kind of the way they are, and then revisit as necessary as we learn more and more about what this possible project might look like. Does that sound right to everybody? Good.
Thanks for the great questions.
Yeah, good discussion. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Then I don't have to talk as much. Next, then, if there's nothing else on that, Claire would like to tell us about a possible, or maybe Natalia would like to tell us about a possible economic development opportunity. This isn't like a reverse funnel scheme, is it? So I'm not interested.
No, and it's good timing because it really falls in line with the previous discussion about establishing priorities, criteria for these types of requests. So we received a request last week from a business who is just outside of Fergus Falls that is looking to build something new within city limits. They're looking at land that currently does not have a paved road or city utility access, and so they've requested that the city or the Port Authority cover those costs. So I just want to tell you a little bit about this business first, and then we can kind of go into next steps. So the business is a 91-year-old fourth-generation farm equipment business that's based out of North Dakota. They expanded here in early 2020. They have outgrown their 8,000 square foot building and are hoping to build a 12,000 square foot building on a 5-acre parcel. They currently have 4 employees with an annual revenue of about $4.5 million. The expansion would create an additional 2 high-paying jobs, averaging about $75,000, with anticipated revenue increase up to $500 million. The additional space, and in that particular location, in proximity to I-94, would allow them to add several new lines of construction equipment that would grow their customer base, increase revenue, and create even more jobs, which I know that's kind of a hot topic right now. They would like to be operational in this new facility by the end of 2022. So the land in question is about a 60-acre parcel. They're looking at about 5 acres. So that black square, and again, I'm not an engineer, this is not to scale, just trying to show you and give you an idea of where that's located. There is a shop currently in that area of that red square, so they would want the land closest to the interstate for visibility purposes. So the Western Avenue Road is currently paved, I think, all the way up to where Warren's is, so they would just be looking to have that western portion paved with utilities extended. So my question for you is, when we receive requests like this, because it seems like there are more and more of them every week, how do you want me to proceed? How do you want city staff to proceed? I think it would be, again, that just goes towards that conversation of creating processes, some procedures, and some criteria for how you go about that decision making. This is one of those projects, again, where other people took examples that have already happened in the city of Fergus Falls, that this business received a brand new road and they did not have to pay for it, so I would like the same opportunity. And we do, let them know that there are, there's job creation, there's tax generation requirements, those types of things, but we need to establish what those look like, I think, so that we know how to proceed.
What business are all of these requests facing? Like, which business is it that got a road built for them?
I'll chime in on that, but I won't answer your question because I don't know. But what makes me think, so this is like an implement dealer, right? This would be like RDO, further down the interstate. So to speak, they're both selling tractors, right? Okay, as you were talking, it reminded me when we did a project up by RDO, again, how we've normally done projects is we put in infrastructure, but we assess the benefiting properties for their proportionate shares of that, which has to be at least 20% of the cost of the project. And I specifically remember sending RDO a bill for that, and they wrote a check for it. So that's how typically it's been done. We assess for their proportionate share. Now, there's always some city share in that because it's a street that everyone can drive on, but their proportionate share. So we haven't just built a road and said, here you go. And this is kind of retail on a big scale. We have not ever done incentives for retail either, I don't think, because that gets to be dangerous. I'm just thinking out loud here, but I compare this to like an RDO or a type machine, and we have assessed for their proportionate shares in the past. So typically it has not been, sure, we'll put this in for free.
When things have been deferred or things have been assessed once they come into city limits, so some of those mechanisms may have been misconstrued for somebody getting it for free. I don't know if city limits that we've done.
Some of that was probably if they weren't in city limits, we have no authority to assess those costs, but we hold them and they are assessed for when they do get annexed in. And that was maybe then when we sent that bill to RDO. To here's your connection charge now that you're in.
So is the 5 acres the red square? I mean,
Again, not to scale, but it would be in that vicinity, closer
Yeah.
to I-94. That's where they're looking to build.
so it just seemed like it's an odd place, sort of like to be illogical.
Yeah, and we've been working with this particular business for about a year, trying to identify a new location for them. So we've looked at both existing properties, developable sites, both for lease and purchase, and this is the one that suits their needs the best because of the visibility with I-94 and closer access to, just the interstate, and there's already other, commercial. The zoning is appropriate over there already as well. So that's what they're looking at. So when we get requests like this, I'd just like some guidance on what you as a port are looking for in terms of.
And it was a point of discussion. I mean, I don't know if we know, honestly. I don't think we do. Others would tell you right now.
Yep.
But I think part of it is, to your example, a lot of entities don't deal with retail because of that reason, the competitive thing. And so, you look at what's the trade area. If it's internal or close, definitely wouldn't do it. If it's external, it's a little hairier because there are benefits for it. But, we could have as a policy, we just don't do that and take the risk we lose the business. They get a good benefit out of everything else related to Fergus, including a new road, and I would think it'd still pencil out unless their market is such they can go any place, and I guess we have to take that risk. So I guess I get it from the retail perspective. If the exact same situation where there's a manufacturer and all sales were coming from outside the area and they're not competing directly, what would be the perspective? My perspective is we'd fund it as much as we needed to get it here within reason. What are they competing against? We wouldn't give away everything. We'd have to say, what are they competing against? Which we probably don't know that. So I guess I'm wondering what everybody else's thoughts are. If this were a manufacturer, what would be the thought?
So I had a question earlier, and you started to address it when you talked about proportionate share. Because Bill, as you mentioned, nothing's free, right? So how typical is it in other communities, and Steve, you probably know this answer, that manufacturers expect to pay some of the assessment fees? Does that, I mean, other cities don't give everything away, or do they? I don't know.
In my opinion, I don't think they do. I don't think, I mean, you hear that all over as, everyone's baiting everyone to come in. Come here, we'll give you this. I know in our industrial parks, we had assessments on all those lots throughout. Now, some of them we had trouble selling because they were so high. WMI bought down half of those assessments, so that kind of helped. Of course, we use TIF a lot for manufacturers in our industrial parks too. That was used a lot, but they still had the assessments for this, so
Yeah,
not giving you good answers, but
I don't know either, but that was my question originally, is what is the competitiveness?
Yeah.
What do we have to have? I mean, I think that this came up about a year ago in this group. I think we need to understand that better so we can make these types of decisions. And then we delineate between is it manufacturing, is it not, what's our policy, and then they'll know where to go, is my gut.
see, and we work with Tom Denaway, as you've seen him online for our TIF presentations, because he works in development. I often tell people this is not my forte.
Bill, I think everything is your forte.
No, it's not.
Well, I do think though, it kind of goes back to Bill's point about just run the numbers and what's the formula for a business that's not in town, that we're not getting any taxes for. Well, what is the potential then tax base versus what you can afford and stay in good standing with your bonding, in order to give some of those benefits.
You
'Cause
know,
we don't have that right now, and maybe that's something that manufacturer can share.
Well, this is not manufacturing, I guess.
Or, I'm sorry,
But
they're
yeah,
retail.
but yeah, I mean, I'm sure they'd be happy to provide any additional details so that we could, run those numbers. I mean, what they're looking to build, we could easily find from the county and get some estimated, tax.
and obviously Fergus is a good market for them, otherwise they wouldn't be interested in expanding. So
Yep.
they want to be here to a certain extent.
Yep.
And, and Steve raised a really good point of, looking at the businesses we already have, because we don't want to give a new business a whole bunch of money to bring in a competitor for someone who's been paying taxes for, that's not necessarily the right thing to do. So that's another aspect that we would need to look at. But,
So as a port, what are the next steps that we need to take to create this economic development policies? Or, I mean, what NETI is looking for right now are some guiding principles, I think, from us. I think we need to really focus on that.
Just, it's not of interest, is this Portland?
No.
I mean, is this or is this a city road?
private,
It's privately owned.
Right, so this isn't, I mean, why does this fall to port as opposed to not the city? Because if it's not our land, isn't it city jurisdiction as opposed to port? We don't own the land, we don't own the road.
we could,
Just, I mean,
let's say the tenant, let's say they buy the land and then we could build the road. I mean, that's something we could do. I'm not committing us to that by any means, but
I think you'd have the legal authority to do that and then turn
Yeah.
the road over to the city is what you would do.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
Do you need this tonight?
No. Oh, no, this is just to start a discussion. Sorry.
Some of this stuff comes up.
No. Just looking to consider priorities and the criteria for future land development and use, but using this as an example because we're, again, seeing quite a few of these requests lately, so.
And it really illustrates the need for that, for policies and procedures. So,
But they do have a timeline, don't they? I mean,
Well,
they said-
they do. They'd like to purchase the land by the end of the year. They will not commit unless they have an answer about this funding mechanism. I mean, I'm sure anything can be negotiated, or, that they're open to negotiating as well, but,
we need to
Just
check
bringing
whether
it
the
up to-
road is, I mean, if this is going to be farm equipment, you're going to have semis going up there, you're going to have obviously tractors. Is the road that, is currently there, is it to the weight limit of semis?
what was it, Ditch Witch retailer
Yeah.
right there that probably gets
Yeah.
their share of traffic. Isn't there still, right? The Ditch Witch out there?
Well, it's on Western, it's not on Wayran's. The road that goes east and west.
Just right
Yeah.
south of this map. Are you talking about the
Yeah.
road that runs
Yeah.
across like Northern Lake
Yeah.
Central and that?
Yeah,
Yeah, there was at one point, sorry for my ignorance, but there was a
yeah.
Ditch Witch.
I think Ditch Witch is still there.
So,
But roads are built for obviously for a certain amount of traffic loads, so.
so for next steps, Clara and Natalia, could you guys work together to start coming up with the framework of those policies and how, I don't know if we need to bring in a third party that does this kind of thing. And Bill had something to say.
Going right with what you're doing, and I think it involves the city as well. So I was going to throw, because Claire and I were just talking about this last week, that we need that. We need that as staff.
Yep.
Of
Yep.
what are our guiding principles from the city and the port. So we should almost look at this in October, and I think it needs to incorporate city and port.
Yep.
I mean,
Sure.
it's definitely,
Yep.
so why don't, I'm talking way too much, but.
No such thing.
But really, the city and, us in Greater Fergus Falls should talk and we'll get moving on this. We certainly have some example policies already. We've reached out to Tom Denaway. You already did that, kind of teeing that up.
Okay.
So that we look towards October to start bringing some framework to both bodies, maybe?
Yeah.
Or we had a joint meeting. Looking to Andrew on that as far as between the port and the city.
Andy looks like he's eager to get started, so good. That's what I like to see.
Every conversation we have leads back to the same thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Everybody's working, thinking.
Yep. So.
And
That's
we
what-
having all of us on the same page and knowing what all of your guiding principles are will just be super helpful.
Nobody'd have to do any work really after that.
Well, it'll help.
Yeah. So okay.
Thank you.
So we'll just ask the city to work with Greater Fergus Falls and determine the process there. So all right. Well, unless anyone has any other further items, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Good job, team.
I think October. Let's just roll.